The Game really looked at the aftermath of 2024. Watched Kendrick Lamar turn a whole summer into a victory lap. Watched Drake spent months trying to reframe what everybody heard with their own ears, and still decided to pop up with a Team Up record that's basically two grown men doing cosplay in front of Kendrick's shadow. And what makes it crazier is this: the loudest part of this whole rollout isn't even the music, it's the optics. It's the cover art people have been comparing to Kendrick's imagery. It's the feature that doesn't feel like a feature. It's the weird half-diss, half-bait energy, like the Game is standing outside Dot's house ringing the doorbell and sprinting down the block before anybody opens it. Because if you're a West Coast rap fan, you've been told a story your whole life. The Game is supposed to be one of the guys who understands lineage, the guy who came in with the big homie cosign energy, who lived inside that "I'm really from here" aura. So why does he suddenly sound like Compton's unofficial spokesperson for the Toronto Grievance Department? And don't miss the timing either. People are calling it a new Kendrick diss album moment. Whether it's a real project, a rumored pack of records, or just the culture feeling like Dot is about to spin the block again. Either way, the air gets thin. Everybody starts moving funny. And right in that window, the Game decides to attach himself to Drake's name like a life raft. Here's the part you're not gonna like if you're still defending this. By the time we get to the business detail later, why this kind of beef-adjacent rollout is basically engineered for streaming and headlines, you're gonna realize the Game didn't step into a war. He stepped into an ad campaign, and he might be the product. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe. Let's get into it. So let's set the table, because this story looks like, ha-ha, the Game being the Game, but it's bigger than that right now. We're in the post-2024 landscape where Kendrick and Drake turned rap back into appointment viewing. Even people who don't care about lyric breakdowns were suddenly acting like they were on Genius at 3 a.m., arguing over syllables like it was the Super Bowl. And when you have a moment like that, it does two things at once. It crowns somebody, and it exposes everybody else. It shows you who can really stand in the ring, and it shows you who's been surviving off aura, nostalgia, and remember when. That's not even hate. Hip-hop is supposed to be honest. The culture keeps receipts. Now add the Game to that. The Game has never been talentless. Let's be clear before anybody gets emotional. He can rap. He has real songs. He has real records that mattered. But he also has a long history of moving like attention is oxygen. He'll swing at a headline. He'll swing at a moment. He'll swing at a name and then look around like, why y'all mad? I'm just being competitive. And then there's Drake, who's in this weird era where every move gets read as either strategic genius or desperate damage control, with almost no middle ground. So when you see those two circles overlap, the Game chasing relevance and Drake chasing narrative, you're not watching a friendship, you're watching a transaction. And that's why this matters right now, not just because Kendrick is the measuring stick, but because the West Coast angle makes it radioactive. People take that personally, they take it culturally, they take it historically. So the question isn't, is this song good? The question is, what is the Game actually trying to buy with this move? And why does it look like he's paying with his own legacy? Because if this is really about smoke with Kendrick, why does it feel like everything is staged to suggest a fight without actually starting one? First piece of surface evidence, and this is the one even casual fans caught immediately, is the visual language. The artwork and promo imagery people have been circulating for this no breaks moment. The red car theme, the composition, the way it's framed, the way it's obviously meant to trigger the Kendrick comparison. It's not subtle. It's not inspired by. It's, I want your brain to think Kendrick before you think about my song. And I need y'all to sit with how nasty that is as a tactic, because it's one thing to compete with somebody. It's another thing to use their silhouette as your thumbnail. That's the first tell that this isn't about artistry first. It's about capture. It's about the scroll. It's about hijacking the keyword. And if you're a Game fan, you should be the first one offended. Because why are we playing SEO games with an artist who's supposed to have enough discography to stand on his own 2 feet? If you're rolling out something tied to a documentary series, an era that has real meaning to people, why are you dressing it up like Kendrick fan fiction?
Second piece of surface evidence is the way Drake is being used in the record conversation. Allegedly, and I'm saying allegedly because I'm not here to invent credits, people are pointing out that Drake's presence is being marketed like a big cosign, while the actual contribution feels minimal, like a hook tag, a repeated phrase, a ghost of a feature. And I've seen this pattern enough times to call it what it looks like: name rental. It's the rap version of putting a celebrity on the poster, and then they're in the movie for 90 seconds. It's Drake is here, not because Drake had something he needed to say, but because Drake's name is a magnet. It pulls blogs, it pulls playlists, it pulls reaction.
Channels, it pulls the exact type of engagement that makes a rollout feel like an event, even when the music isn't doing the heavy lifting. And that is why the two dorks energy is fitting, because it feels like the game is trying to stand next to Drake so he can borrow controversy, and Drake is trying to stand next to the game so he can borrow West Coast credibility. It's a swap meet, a flea market of aura. Third piece of surface evidence is the public reaction ecosystem around anything Kendrick adjacent since 2024. Even when Kendrick doesn't post, even when he's not on the timeline, the culture starts reacting like he is, because everybody moves around his absence like it's a threat. You'll see affiliate accounts, fan pages, podcasters, and industry voices framing the move as disrespect, clout chasing, or bait. And when you see that, it tells you something important. The audience can smell motive now. The 2024 run sharpened people's instincts. Back then, you could hide behind "it's just rap." Now, if it looks like you're poking a bear for clicks, people call it out in real time. So when the game puts out something that's visually poking Kendrick while musically doing the safe thing, no direct name, no real statement, no real risk, people read it like cowardice. They read it like you want the benefit of the beef without the consequences of the beef. And does everybody understand how crazy that is? You're allegedly teasing smoke with the one guy in this whole situation who has already proven he'll actually write the diss, actually perform the moment, actually take the heat, and then actually stand on it in public. Now here's where it gets even nastier, because if you're thinking, okay, maybe it's just a rollout trick, cool, but then why are you dragging Drake into it at all if the goal is to build the game's album? If the game is still that guy, why does he need the Toronto attachment to sell a West Coast legacy brand? And oh, do I have more for you, because the part the stands keep skipping is the cultural reaction. Who's side-eyeing this, who's laughing, and who's quietly telling you without telling you that this is goofy? And yes, I said goofy. If you're a two words counts as a feature defender, go ahead and get your fingers warmed up for the comments, because the next piece is exactly where the excuses start falling apart, especially when we talk about how the West Coast actually treats loyalty when it's real. So let's talk cultural evidence, because this is where the story stops being about a single record and starts being about reputation. The first cultural signal is how fast the conversation turns into legacy talk. Whenever the game does something like this, the culture doesn't just critique the moment, they rewind his whole timeline. You'll see people bring up how he's always had this complicated relationship with validation, how he'll claim a throne and then look for applause at the same time, how he'll position himself as a gatekeeper and then chase the same attention patterns he accuses other people of. And when you pair that with the Kendrick moment, it lands worse, because Kendrick represents the opposite archetype, the guy who disappears, works, drops when he wants, and then lets the work bully the room. That contrast is brutal, and it's why this move reads like insecurity. Because when you're secure, you don't need to borrow a rival's enemy to feel tall. Second cultural piece is the way West Coast-centered platforms and communities tend to treat outsider alignment. I'm not even talking about gang politics or street stuff, don't twist it. I'm talking about cultural posture. The West has always had this chip on its shoulder about being treated like a backdrop for other people's narratives. So when a West Coast artist appears to be acting like a mouthpiece for Drake's post-2024 grievances, it hits like betrayal to some listeners. And you can see that in how people frame it. Not the game is making a song, but the game is picking a side. That's the key. Even if the game's intention is I'm just making music, the perception is you're helping somebody else rewrite history.
And that's where the rumored new Kendrick diss album energy becomes relevant. Because in moments where the culture feels like Kendrick might drop again, whether that's true, rumored, or just the audience projecting, the temperature rises. Suddenly being neutral isn't neutral. Suddenly little moves look like declarations. So the game doing a Drake-linked rollout in that window feels like he's trying to get ahead of the wave, like he's placing a bet before the odds shift again. Third cultural signal is how other artists and insiders tend to respond to bait. And I'm going to be careful here. I'm not going to put words in anyone's mouth. But historically, when TDE-adjacent voices, Kendrick-adjacent circles, or even just lyric-first artists see somebody doing almost diss marketing, the reaction is usually the same. Mockery. Not anger, mockery. That's what kills you. Anger makes you important. Mockery makes you small. And this is where you might hear people reference things like punch energy or TDE side-eye, or they're laughing in group chats, because that's how this culture really works. It's not always a public statement. Sometimes it's just the way the room moves, the way you stop getting serious responses, the way your name gets brought up like a punchline instead of a threat. Now, to be fair, here's the counter-argument. Some people will say this is hip-hop. Everybody takes shots. The game can do what he wants. Kendrick doesn't own the
West. Drake can feature with whoever. And on paper, sure, that's the clean, reasonable version. But the problem is the details. The details make it look like clout engineering, not competitive spirit. If you want smoke, say it with your chest. If you want to compete, compete. Don't stand behind vibes, imagery, and maybe he meant this, like we're supposed to do homework to find your courage. And what I think is happening here is the game wants the cultural adrenaline of a Kendrick moment without the lyrical risk of actually battling Kendrick. Because if he actually steps into that, there's no hiding. There's no, I was just trolling. There's no, y'all took it wrong. It becomes permanent. So instead, you get this weird middle zone where the game can signal to Drake fans, see, I'm with y'all, while also leaving himself an exit ramp to say, I never dissed Kendrick. It's a two-way lock for cowardice, and the culture hates that more than a bad song. Quick checkpoint for the real ones. At this point in the script, we're roughly in the 2,300 to 2,500 word pocket, which is exactly where we need to be before the gear shift. Now, let's break the actual system that makes moves like this feel inevitable. Because here's the pattern interrupt. This isn't just about the game being messy. This is about how the modern rap economy rewards mess more than mastery, especially when the mess can be attached to a name as big as Kendrick's. First systemic angle is streaming-era incentive design. In the algorithm world, controversy is a shortcut to distribution. If you can get your title, your cover, your caption, your rollout, or your feature to trigger an existing conversation, you're basically plugging your record into a live power outlet. That's why you see so many releases now built like clickbait, the "is he dissing" captions, the "responding to" thumbnails, the "fans think" headlines. It's not always because the artist is passionate about the issue. It's because the issue is already trending, and trending is money. And this is where the Kendrick factor becomes unfair to everybody else. Kendrick is a walking trend. He can be silent and still dominate conversation. So if you're an artist trying to juice your rollout, the laziest play on earth is to position your product as adjacent to Kendrick drama. It's like setting up a lemonade stand next to a parade and acting shocked you got foot traffic. Second systemic angle is legacy monetization. This is the part people don't like to admit because it ruins the romance. But in 2026, catalog is currency. Your old hits aren't just old hits. They're assets. They're collateral. They're leverage for touring offers, festival slots, brand partnerships, sync placements, documentary deals, and even negotiation power with distributors. So when you see an artist with a legacy brand, like a documentary series, roll out a moment that feels more like rage bait than music first, you have to ask, what are they protecting? What are they trying to inflate? Because if your new music is undeniable, you don't need to glue it to somebody else's controversy. You let the record lead. You let the performance lead. You let the bars lead. But if you're not confident the music alone will create the moment, you manufacture the moment.
And manufacture is the right word. Manufactured narratives are a product. You sell the debate, you sell the reaction, you sell the outrage, and you sell the tribalism. Drake fans show up to defend Drake. Kendrick fans show up to clown it. Neutral fans show up because they hate watch. And the platforms love all of it because engagement is engagement. Now put those two angles together, algorithm incentives plus legacy monetization, and you get exactly the type of move we're watching. A rollout that's engineered to make you argue about Kendrick and Drake while the game quietly cashes the attention check. And notice how it also functions as reputation laundering for Drake. If Drake is still dealing with the cultural aftertaste of 2024, the smartest PR in the world is to stand next to artists who can give you a different frame. See, I'm tapped in with the West. See, I'm outside the beef. See, it's all love. Meanwhile, the audience remembers the music, remembers the claims, remembers the timeline, and Drake gets to act like the whole thing is just internet noise. So when Drake pops up in these feature but not really ways, allegedly just enough to get his name in the metadata, just enough to make blogs post it, just enough to make playlists consider it, it's not about expression, it's about presence. It's about keeping the brand in your face until the public is tired of being mad. And the game in this equation becomes the perfect vehicle because he's loud, he's willing, and he already got a reputation for messy alliances. That's why I call him GNX cosplayer in this story, because it's not the real car, it's the kit version. It's the body kit on a regular engine, looks fast on Instagram, gets cooked on the freeway. Now here's where the new Kendrick diss album talk becomes the leverage point. Whether Kendrick actually has a full diss project, a loose pack, or nothing at all, the rumor itself functions like a weapon in the media ecosystem. Because once the culture believes Dot might drop, everybody starts repositioning.
Media outlets start pre-writing narratives. Reaction channels start preloading takes. Artists start doing little just-in-case moves to either align with the winner or avoid being seen as the loser. And that's what we're watching with the game. He's trying to pre-select an identity. I'm not with Kendrick, I'm with the opposition. I'm relevant because I'm near the fire. But the system trick is this. Kendrick doesn't even have to move for you to burn yourself. Because if the audience sees you as using Kendrick for attention, you lose credibility. If Kendrick responds and destroys you, you lose credibility. If Kendrick ignores you and you look like you were shadowboxing, you lose credibility. There's no win condition unless the music is so good that it overrides the motive, and that's a hard bar. And I think we just need to set the truth on what is actually happening here. The game isn't battling Kendrick, he's battling irrelevance. Drake isn't collaborating, he's rebuilding optics. And the culture is the one being asked to pretend this is a real war when it looks like a grift. So here's the major truth bomb, the part that makes this whole thing click into place. The diss album isn't the album you think it is. The real diss is the strategy. Because allegedly, reportedly, and based on how this rollout is being framed, what's happening is a classic attention extraction play. Use Kendrick's name, directly or indirectly, as a distribution engine, and use Drake's name as a controversy accelerant, so the game can sell you a moment instead of earning one. That's why the visuals feel like Kendrick bait. That's why the feature feels like a placeholder. That's why the messaging feels like it's always one step away from actually saying something. Because the goal isn't clarity. The goal is ambiguity. Ambiguity keeps people arguing. Arguing keeps the algorithm feeding it, and the algorithm feeding it keeps the rollout alive. And if Kendrick really is sitting on records, if there really is a new Kendrick diss album in any form, then this is even more reckless, because you are basically doing cardio in front of a loaded cannon. You're daring the one guy in this whole era who has proven he can turn a response into a cultural event. But the nastiest part is what it does to the audience. It trains fans to treat hip-hop like WWE promos instead of music. It trains you to accept hinting as courage. It trains you to accept association as victory. It trains you to celebrate a headline as if it's a bar. And that's why this matters culturally, because the system wants you stuck in the reaction loop. The system wants you fighting in the comments about who's corny, who's brave, who's loyal, who's a traitor, while the artists and their teams monetize your emotions like ad inventory. Meanwhile, Kendrick's whole brand, love him or hate him, is discipline. It's precision. It's, I'm not going to feed the circus unless I decide the time. That's why he's dangerous, and that's why all these side quests keep popping up around him. Because when you can't beat the hero, you try to build a maze around him and hope he gets lost. But Dot doesn't get lost. Dot just doesn't show up to your maze. So when you see the game doing this, the reveal is simple and devastating. He's not positioning himself as Kendrick's rival. He's positioning himself as Kendrick's advertisement. He's turning Kendrick into the backdrop so he can pretend his own rollout is bigger than it is. And for Drake, the reveal is just as ugly. These optics features are a way to stay in the conversation without taking the same lyrical risk again. It's the rap version of being on the court without shooting, presence without performance, brand without bravery. Now tell me, what is more embarrassing than that? And this is where the hero resolution comes in. Because the funny part is, Kendrick doesn't even have to spike the football. The scoreboard is already there. The hero in this story is the person who does the job to 100%, then goes quiet, then lets the results speak. Look at how this whole thing is framed. The game is allegedly teasing, baiting, borrowing imagery, borrowing controversy. Drake is allegedly popping up just enough to keep his name attached to motion. And Kendrick? Kendrick is the gravitational force that makes all these people orbit whether he posts or not. That's real power. Not, I can trend. Power is, you can't stop talking about me even when I'm not talking. And the way I see it, that's the difference between legacy and nostalgia. Nostalgia begs you to remember it. Legacy keeps affecting the present. The game is asking you to remember 2005 while trying to win 2026 with a thumbnail. Kendrick is affecting the present without asking permission. Here's the contrast, one-liner that sums it up. One side is trying to borrow a moment, and the other side is the reason moments happen. And for the West Coast conversation, this is the cleanest lesson possible. The culture will forgive a bad song. The culture will even forgive a weird collaboration if it feels honest. What it won't forgive is you using the region like a costume while you run somebody else's agenda.
If the game wants to be remembered as a serious artist, then move serious. If you want to compete with Kendrick, compete with Kendrick. Bars, clarity, risk, and consequence. Don't do this "maybe I meant it" dance and then act shocked when people call you pathetic. Because right now, the only person taking damage from this is the game himself. Kendrick's position doesn't shrink. Drake's optics might get a tiny band-aid, but the game's name? It starts sounding like a punchline in a conversation it used to be respected in. And I'm telling you, as somebody who watches this culture every day, that's the point of no return. Once the room laughs, it's hard to make them listen again. So where does this go next? This is only the start, and I don't mean that in a spooky, vague way. I mean we're about to see whether the game actually commits to this path, whether he doubles down with more bait, whether Drake keeps doing these presence features, and whether Kendrick's camp chooses silence or chooses a moment. Because if the new Kendrick diss album talk turns into an actual drop, or even an actual confirmed Kendrick move, everybody who tried to monetize his name is going to look around and realize they built their rollout next to a wildfire. And if Kendrick decides to address even one of these side quests, even briefly, it will expose who's been performing and who's been working. So if you want to stay ahead of this, you already know what to do. Stay locked in, because the next phase isn't just music, it's positioning, it's alliances, it's media narratives, it's who's going to pretend they were always on the right side once the temperature changes. And if you want a video to watch right after this, I want you to click the next one because it connects the last dot. The way post-2024 damage control rap is being engineered, how certain camps try to turn a loss into a long, slow rewrite through features, headlines, and fake controversy, and the exact moment it backfires when the culture stops buying the script. That one is nasty, it's specific, and once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it.